Or that Jim after all didn't need that legacy to pay them? But you know better, I said sharply. Oh, yes, I know better. I even know who did it, or think I do. Someone, my dear, who had easy access to that house. Who knew its habits to the last minute. Who was ordinarily calm on that surface, but was capable of terrible rages. Maybe someone who was sane enough but not quite normal. But how am I to prove it? Suddenly I thought I saw a real light. I sat bolt upright in my chair. It was Lizzie, I said. Lizzie from the Talbots. It must have been. She loathed Mrs. Lancaster, but she was always in and out of the house. And she's terrible when she's angry. I've seen her angry. He was lighting his pipe. Well, he said thoughtfully, let's consider Lizzie. I've done it already. But she's gone, Herbert. She ran away this afternoon. Ran away? Where? He asked sharply. I don't know. To her sister's, perhaps. I told him what Annie had said, and he sent for her and questioned her quickly. He looked sober and anxious, and after making me promise not to leave my room that night and assuring me that there would be a guard outside, he merely put a hand on my shoulder for a second, caught up his hat and left. A minute later I heard him driving out of the Crescent like a crazy man. That was at 10:30 on Saturday night, August the 27th. But it was not until almost midnight that the police located the driver of the interurban car Lizzie had taken, and discovered that she had left it some 4 miles beyond Hollytree at a stop which was nothing but a dirt road crossing the track. Within 15 minutes of that time city police, the sheriff's car and 2 or 3 hastily notified state troopers were converging on the Hollytree district, their orders being to trace if possible a tall thin woman dressed in black and carrying an old-fashioned valise, who had left the car at that point, and also to find the farm belonging to her sister. They found the farm, a small down at the heel place, and finally roused the family. But Lizzie had not been there. From the moment she had stepped off the platform of that interurban car she had apparently disappeared into a void. It was 10 o'clock the next morning before they had any clue whatever. Then a man living on the outskirts of Hollytree telephoned into police headquarters in the city. I've got a white dog out here. He's a wanderer, and he came home about an hour ago covered with blood. He isn't hurt. He looks as though he'd been swimming in bloody water, and I thought you'd like to see him before I wash him. It looks queer to me. Chapter 44. Herbert and Sullivan went out at once, and the inspector followed with the police commissioner, who was in golf clothes and rather irritated at losing his Sunday morning game. The dog was in an enclosure behind a small house, and a half-dozen curious neighbors were staring at him over the fence. He wore a muzzle so he couldn't lick the stuff off, sir. There was no doubt among any of the men that the stuff was blood. There was a serious question, of course, as to whether it was human or not. The result was that Herbert Dean cut off some of the hair and went back to town with it to make the usual test, and that he missed the search which followed. Judging from the newspapers the next day, it was an exciting one. It was a Sunday morning, and that part of the local population which had not gone to church turned out with a will. Orders were to look, not necessarily for a lake or stream, but for some small and stagnant body of water where blood would lie. They were warned also that blood changes in sunlight, or even assumes the color of its background, and were to mark and report any suspicious body of water, however small, whether it bore any indication of what they were after or not. In the meantime, Dean had telephoned that the microscope showed that the specimen was undoubtedly human blood, and as soon as possible he rejoined them. He was too late, however. On the outskirts of the town itself, and only 100 feet or so from the main road, was an empty house which had a local reputation for being haunted. It had been for rent, furnished, for the past 5 years. Recently, however, it had been rented. A week or so before, a man had called the owner over the telephone and taken it for the summer. He had sent 2 months' rent in advance and had ordered the key left in the house on a certain day. Strange as all this was, the owner had formed a theory. Once or twice members of the local psychic society had held sittings there, and as those people often preferred to be anonymous, he had accepted the terms without question. He had not been asked to make any repairs, and he had made none. No tenant had moved in, although on the Wednesday night previous the neighbors had reported that a car had stopped there and that something had been moved into the building. As the nearest house was 500 yards away, the identity of this object was not known. But on that Sunday morning, while the search was going on, this owner, a man named Johnson, decided to walk over to see if his new tenant had arrived. He was uneasy, for the drain pipe which carried the waste water out of the house had broken, and if used the water would collect in a low-lying bit of ground behind it.